aspires to be that great. And he stands alone. The musician that he was, the singer that he was, and the songwriter.
What happens when the very fame that lifts someone to the top suddenly turns against them? For decades, Vince Gill was considered one of the purest voices in country music. His smooth vocals, heartfelt lyrics, and emotional performances earned him admiration from fans across America. Awards piled up on his shelves, his songs dominated country radio, and his concerts filled arenas night after night. From the outside, it looked like the perfect life. A successful career, a beloved reputation, a voice millions of people trusted. But in the year 2000, one decision changed everything. When Vince Gill married Amy Grant, one of the most recognizable figures in Christian music, the reaction was explosive. Both had recently ended their previous marriages, and for many fans, especially within religious communities, the relationship quickly became controversial. Suddenly, the man who had spent years building a reputation for sincerity found himself facing criticism from the very audience that once adored him. Some radio stations quietly stopped playing their music. Letters poured in from disappointed fans who felt betrayed. Outside certain concerts, protesters carried signs accusing him of abandoning the moral values his songs seemed to represent. For Vince Gill, the backlash was shocking. The same public that once praised his honesty now questioned his character and integrity. But what many people didn't understand was that behind the headlines and controversy stood a man who had already endured decades of personal struggle, heartbreak, and quiet battles. Because Vince Gill's story didn't begin with fame or awards, it began in a modest Oklahoma home where music echoed through the walls and where tragedy would shape the heart of a young boy long before the world ever heard his voice. And that early pain would later become the very soul of the music that made him famous. Long before the awards, the sold-out tours, and the legendary career, Vince Gill was simply a quiet boy growing up in Norman, Oklahoma. His home was unusual in the most fascinating way. By day, his father worked as a respected federal judge, a man known for his discipline, intelligence, and authority inside the courtroom. People in town saw him as a serious figure of law and order. But when evening came, that same judge became someone entirely different. He traded legal briefs for musical instruments. Guitars, banjos, and harmonicas filled the house. Late at night, Vince would lie awake in his bedroom listening to the sounds drifting down the hallway. His parents often played together, creating spontaneous jam sessions that sometimes lasted for hours. Their music would spill into the quiet Oklahoma night while neighbors sat on porches listening to the melodies. Those nights planted the first seeds of something special in the young boy's heart. But childhood was far from easy. Vince was born with crossed eyes, a condition that made him painfully self-conscious. Doctors eventually performed surgeries to correct the problem, but even after treatment, the issue never fully disappeared. At school, other children noticed, and children can be cruel. The teasing became constant. Some classmates stared, others mocked him openly. Slowly, Vince began avoiding social situations altogether. Instead of playing outside with friends, he often retreated into solitude. But that isolation led him somewhere powerful. Music became his refuge. When the outside world felt overwhelming, he picked up a guitar and disappeared into melodies. What started as an escape soon became something much deeper. Because in that quiet bedroom in Oklahoma, a shy boy who felt out of place in the world was unknowingly building the foundation for one of country music's most unforgettable voices. At the age of 10, Vince Gill experienced a moment that would forever alter the emotional landscape of his life. His older half-brother, Bob, was involved in a devastating car accident on a rainy highway outside Oklahoma City. Before the crash, Bob had been full of promise. He was a strong student, a talented athlete, and someone many believed would go on to achieve great things. But in a single moment, everything changed. The accident left Bob with severe brain damage. Suddenly, the entire Gill family faced a heartbreaking new reality. Bob struggled to remember names. Conversations became difficult. The young man who once dreamed of a bright future now required constant care and supervision. For more than 25 years, Vince watched his parents carry the heavy burden of supporting Bob's medical needs. The emotional strain was enormous. The financial pressure was even greater. His father took on additional legal work to cover the cost of treatments, therapy, and long-term care. The stress slowly began to affect the entire household, and young Vince witnessed all of it. He saw the quiet exhaustion in his parents' faces. He saw the way hope could slowly fade into acceptance. He saw just how fragile life could be. When Bob eventually passed away years later, the loss left a permanent scar on Vince's heart. But pain has a strange way of shaping artists. Rather than speaking openly about his grief, Vince poured those emotions into music. Every chord carried a piece of sadness. Every lyric held a memory. And that deep emotional honesty would eventually become the very quality that made millions of listeners feel as if his songs were telling their own stories. Some musical careers begin with years of lessons and formal training. Vince Gill's began almost by accident. One afternoon, while visiting his grandmother's house, the young boy noticed an old acoustic guitar leaning quietly against the wall. Curious, he picked it up. He had never taken a lesson, no one had taught him how to play. But something about the instrument fascinated him. Without any formal instruction, he began experimenting with the strings, trying to recreate a song he had heard before, a classic country tune called Old Shep. At first, the notes sounded clumsy, but within half an hour, something remarkable happened. He had figured out the chords. The melody slowly began to take shape. When his grandmother heard the music, she stopped in her tracks. She was stunned. Immediately, she called Vince's parents and told them she had just witnessed something extraordinary. Their son had natural musical ability. By the time Vince was 10 years old, his parents made an enormous sacrifice. Despite the family's financial pressure from medical bills, they purchased a Gibson electric guitar for him. At the time, it cost nearly $800, an enormous amount of money in the late 1960s. But it wasn't just a gift, it was a declaration, a statement that they believed in their son's talent. From that moment forward, Vince treated music not as a hobby, but as a calling. He practiced relentlessly, sometimes 6 or 8 hours every day. While other teenagers spent time with friends, Vince often stayed home alone in the basement, playing guitar until his fingers hurt. And slowly, the sound that would one day define his career began to take shape. Every successful career has at least one moment of total embarrassment. For Vince Gill, that moment arrived in 1976. At the time, he was part of a young bluegrass band called Mountain Smoke. The group had been working hard to build a reputation, playing small venues and local shows throughout Oklahoma. Then, one evening, they received an opportunity that seemed too good to be true. They were invited to open for a major rock band at a large concert in Oklahoma City. That band was Kiss. For a group of teenage musicians, it felt like the break they had been waiting for. But they quickly realized something was very wrong. The crowd that night expected something explosive: loud electric guitars, fire effects, makeup, and the wild theatrical energy that Kiss was famous for. Instead, the audience got a group of teenagers playing traditional bluegrass. The reaction was immediate. Boos echoed through the massive venue. Plastic cups flew through the air. Some people even threw shoes toward the stage. The audience wanted leather jackets and rock music. They got fiddles and banjos instead. Frustration overwhelmed Vince. In a moment of youthful anger, he reacted badly, flipping off the crowd and storming off stage. It was humiliating. The band felt crushed. But strangely enough, that disaster became a turning point, because sometimes failure teaches lessons success never could. After that night, Vince realized something important. If he wanted to survive in the unpredictable world of music, he needed more than talent. He needed resilience. And very soon, life would give him the opportunity to prove just how strong that resilience truly was. Just 2 years after that humiliating concert, Vince Gill found himself standing at the edge of a completely different opportunity, one that could change his life forever. The country rock band Pure Prairie League was searching for a new lead singer. Their previous vocalist had just left, and the group desperately needed someone who could bring fresh energy to their sound. The band had already built a following, but without a strong frontman, their future looked uncertain. When Vince auditioned, the band immediately noticed something special. His voice was smooth, emotional, and unmistakably unique. It carried a softness that could express heartbreak Yet it also had the strength to fill a crowded venue. Within moments, the musicians in the room realized they were hearing something rare. They offered him the position. At only 21 years old, Vince suddenly found himself performing in front of larger audiences and recording music in professional studios. For a young musician who had once been booed off stage, it felt like an unbelievable second chance. Then, in 1980, something incredible happened. The band released a song called "Let Me Love You Tonight." The track quickly climbed into the top 10 of the Billboard charts. Suddenly, Vince Gill's voice was being heard on radio stations across the country. For the first time, millions of listeners were discovering his sound. But success in the music industry is rarely simple. Even while the band celebrated their biggest hit, trouble was quietly building behind the scenes. Their record label collapsed financially, leaving contracts uncertain and future projects in limbo. Momentum stalled. The success that once seemed unstoppable suddenly felt fragile. Soon, Vince faced a difficult question. Should he remain comfortable within a band that might not survive, or take a massive risk and chase a solo career? It was a gamble that could end everything. But Vince Gill chose the risk. When Vince Gill decided to pursue a solo career, he believed success might come quickly. After all, he already had experience, industry connections, and a voice that many musicians admired. But reality had other plans. Throughout the mid-1980s, Vince released several albums that earned respectful reviews but failed to produce major hits. His songs occasionally appeared on country radio, yet they rarely climbed high on the charts. For years, he remained stuck in a frustrating place, close to success but never quite reaching it. Year after year, the spotlight stayed just out of reach. Some artists would have walked away, but Vince kept working. He toured constantly, sometimes performing hundreds of shows a year. He wrote new songs late at night in small hotel rooms. He collaborated with other musicians across Nashville, slowly building a reputation as one of the most talented voices in the industry. Behind the scenes, many people already knew the truth. The problem wasn't his voice, it was timing. Then, in 1989, everything changed. A new album titled "When I Call Your Name" introduced a deeper and more emotional side of Vince's music. The songs felt more personal, more vulnerable, and more honest than anything he had recorded before. One track in particular stood out. The title song, "When I Call Your Name," carried a haunting melody and heartbreaking lyrics that resonated deeply with listeners. The single climbed to number 2 on the country charts. Critics praised the album's emotional power. Fans began playing the song again and again. After nearly a decade of struggle, something remarkable had finally happened. Vince Gill was no longer a hidden talent waiting for recognition. He had become a star. The early 1990s quickly became the golden era of Vince Gill's career. Hit after hit poured from country radio. Songs like "I Still Believe in You," "Don't Let Our Love Start Slipping Away," and "One More Last Chance" climbed to the top of the charts and stayed there. Fans couldn't get enough of his emotional voice. There was something about the way he sang heartbreak and hope that felt incredibly real. Listeners often said his songs sounded less like performances and more like personal confessions. Concert tickets sold out across the country. Crowds packed arenas just to hear that voice live. Awards began to follow. Grammy trophies, Country Music Association honors. Industry recognition poured in year after year, confirming what many fans already believed, that Vince Gill was one of the finest vocalists country music had ever produced. By the mid-1990s, his music had become the soundtrack for millions of people's lives. But even during this incredible success, his personal life quietly faced challenges. Fame came with a cost. Long tours kept him away from home for months at a time. The constant travel placed enormous pressure on relationships. Slowly, his first marriage began to show signs of strain. By the late 1990s, Vince found himself facing painful personal decisions that would soon change his life forever. And when those decisions finally became public, they would ignite a controversy that followed him for decades. When Vince Gill married Amy Grant in 2000, the reaction was immediate and intense. Both artists were beloved figures in their respective genres. Vince had become a major voice in country music, while Amy was widely known as one of the most influential artists in Christian pop. Their relationship, however, arrived at a complicated moment. Both had just gone through divorces. For many, especially within religious communities, the timing created discomfort and controversy. Some critics labeled the relationship immoral. Others accused the couple of betraying the values their music once represented. The backlash was painful. Radio stations received angry letters from listeners. Fans debated the issue in churches, magazines, and online forums. For a while, it felt as if the public was divided. But Vince Gill refused to hide from the criticism. Years later, during a concert appearance in Kansas City, a group of protesters gathered outside the venue holding signs condemning his marriage. Instead of ignoring them, Vince walked directly towards the group, calmly, respectfully. When one protester shouted accusations about sin and adultery, Vince responded with a quiet but powerful reminder. Faith, he said, was not only about judgment, it was also about forgiveness, about grace. The moment was recorded and quickly spread across the internet. Many fans admired the way he handled the confrontation with calm honesty rather than anger. But life still had more difficult chapters ahead, because sometimes the hardest battles arrive long after the spotlight fades. In recent years, the life of Vince Gill has been filled with unexpected challenges. Doctors eventually discovered that he had a rare heart condition that required open-heart surgery. It was a frightening diagnosis, especially for someone who had spent decades performing on stage. But the situation became even more emotional when Amy Grant required the same surgery weeks later. The couple faced the terrifying procedures one after the other. Then, not long after that, another tragedy struck. Amy was involved in a serious bicycle accident near their home in Nashville. The crash caused a traumatic brain injury that required months of recovery. For a time, even simple activities became difficult. Through every challenge, Vince remained by his side. He canceled concerts. He stepped away from major events. He placed family above fame. Fans noticed. Many praised his loyalty and compassion, saying it proved the man behind the music was just as genuine as the songs he sang. Even now, as he approaches his late 60s, Vince refuses to disappear from the stage. Tours continue. Audiences still fill theaters to hear that unmistakable voice. Because Vince Gill's story is not just about success, it's about endurance. Through criticism, heartbreak, illness, and time itself, he has continued returning to the one place that has always given his life meaning: music. And for millions of listeners, that voice still feels like home.